year, kind of out of the blue. And I hardly ever answer the phone when it's a number that I don't recognize, but I answered the phone, and it was one of the directors of the gallery saying that I had actually gotten a show, and that they would be announcing soon when the dates would be and all these things. And I was absolutely flabbergasted and was like, oh no, I have to put my money where my mouth is. And so starting in November of last year is when I started the first painting, which is actually one of the first paintings you see when you kind of walk into the gallery, which is Fishers of Men. And it deals with kind of the refugee crisis from the perspective of more of like a global look, and specifically thinking about the refugee crisis like kind of in the Mediterranean area right now. A couple of years ago, I watched a documentary on PBS that I didn't even catch all of it. I caught kind of the last half of it, but it was about this rescue ship called the Aquarius that was run by a group of European sailors and rescue crisis aid workers and medical people and all kinds of stuff. And they would go out into the Mediterranean and pick up people they found in boats, and try to get them safely to wherever they needed to go. But the ship ended up getting, I don't remember the official term, but essentially they were, deauthorized. So they're not allowed to go out anymore. And more that's happening, so that people that are still trying to make the, crossing from somewhere in the Middle East to Europe, are now having to increasingly do that on their own. And it's incredibly dangerous. And so I always wanted for this painting to have kind of the boat motif and to have the boat come out of the painting, which it took a really, really long time to figure out how to get the boat to come out of the painting. And so I started this painting in November, but it wasn't actually truly done until close to June, because it took me that long to kind of get my rhythm and figure out how to attach the boat and make it look like it was, coming out of the painting. And so, and that was this was the first painting that I think kind of started the idea of, as I was thinking it through, how to add 3D elements to all of the paintings, and that the 3D helps take something from being just a flat picture that you look at on the wall to something that invades real space and real time. And so it's kind of a marker or reminder to people that these are real issues about real people that's really in our world and requires a real response. And it's going to invade your space. It's going to come out into the place that you are and not just let you step kind of back and just look at it. The other thing that's, I started with this one, and I kind of changed my process a little bit as I went along, was you can kind of see all of the things that are kind of glued on around the edges. I originally started by printing those on vellum, and then found that vellum doesn't actually want to glue to canvas very well. So I had to use a variety of other methods to get stuff to attach. But I wanted to include both in the far background and in the foreground articles and tweets and pictures that you see on the news and statistics and all kinds of different things, all the stuff you would hear on the news or over social media, or even if you just did a Google search about the refugee crisis. And I want that to be present so we think about it, but at the same time too, I don't want it to be the thing that attracts the most attention. And the thing that should attract the most attention, hopefully, if I've done my work right, is the people in the boat. And so that creates kind of a visual narrative that I hope kind of went through every painting in the show of all the views that we have on stuff, all of the ways we understand things. At the end of the day, it's not important if people are the ones that are suffering and not being helped. And so I want people to always kind of rise to the forefront. But on the same token, I don't want to trivialize or kind of flatten out who people are. I want them to be real people and to be as fully rounded as you can make a person in a painting. It's one of the downsides to painting as a medium, is that it's just an image. It's not necessarily got words or music or something else to kind of accompany it to help kind of round something out. And so I tried to paint people in a way that would show full humanity, would make them kind of accessible, but also wouldn't over dramatize things or try to sensationalize who people are or what their stories are. And so this painting was the painting I kind of cut my teeth on in terms of figuring things out. The next painting that I worked on, I started, I think in January. I took a little bit of a break over Christmas. And then the next painting that I worked on was Love Your Neighbor. And it was the painting that I was in the process of working on when the pandemic started. And that kind of changed some things, but then it also didn't really change anything. Because as I was working on all the pieces, I discovered the pandemic was making things more and more relevant instead of less relevant. And I had that moment that everybody kind of had when the pandemic first started and everybody was sheltering at home and there was so much stuff that was up in the air of, do I still even have a show? Like at this point, I've bought a whole bunch of canvas. I've got paint. I'm already like attaching things, and I was working 2 or 3 paintings at a time to try to keep on time. And so had that little like kind of pity party moment of, oh my gosh, what if I've done all this work already and then I don't get a show, and now I just have these giant canvases laying around like with nowhere to go. And then I kind of scooped myself up, had a lot of conversations with my mom and other friends, and was like, no, I can still do this. And even if it doesn't have a show, it's still work that needs to be done, if only for myself. And so this painting was another one of those where I started it like in January, but I didn't really finish it until June. Most of the painting part of it was accomplished by the end of March, but the piece of fabric that's on the front, I wasn't able to go get because I had a very specific idea of what fabric I wanted, and I needed to be able to like hold it and see it. And none of the stores were open until close to the end of May, beginning of June. So there was a lot of these that were kind of stacked around my room studio that were like halfway done, but not quite done, which was kind of interesting because then they kind of influenced each other a little bit, which I think helped towards them all being in a show together. So this one specifically, Love Your Neighbor, I wanted to have a conversation about race in America. And it was started before a lot of the stuff that happened this summer, like the George Floyd murder and the protests. But it's the same conversation that's been going on for quite some time. I think the conversation about race for me first kind of came to a forefront after the Mike Brown shooting, because it was kind of in our own backyard, as it were. And I was away at college at the time that it happened. So it was weird hearing stuff about my city on the national news and seeing a part of my city that I had not really seen or experienced before. Because I'm not technically originally from St. Louis. And so I think that kind of started the journey of trying to understand and to read and to learn more about race and the history of race in America and all the different places that it has affected. And so in this painting, I decided, instead of taking like whole nation kind of look at it, I located it to just basically one state. So most of the pictures and the articles and a lot of the other elements are all from the state of Missouri. And in some cases, they're even from the city of St. Louis. So if you look kind of on the left side of the painting, there's a set of shackles that kind of runs up and down the left side of the painting. And all of the chains are formed by names of slaves from the state of Missouri, starting with Dred Scott and then kind of going down and around. And then underneath of that is where I refined my technique a little bit. Instead of using vellum, I found out that if you use this really crazy process of taping tissue paper to computer paper, you can run it through the printer that way. And then you can print on tissue paper, which when you then glue it on the canvas creates this really kind of cool see-through kind of effect, especially on this one, which then allowed me to layer a lot of stuff over each other. And so on the left side, I've layered in song lyrics and music of old African-American spirituals. And a lot of them were ones that would have been created during the time of slavery and would have been sung by slaves. But I specifically printed them on actual printed music sheets because I wanted them to have a sense of like authenticity, and that this is just as important of a music type as like a concerto or something like that, that this was an honest expression of a group of people. And so, and then I kept kind of the music theme going around the edges, and you'll see kind of going to the top that there are pieces of music that were from the civil rights era. And there's kind of a noose that goes down to the right side, which I debated a lot about adding because it's a very provocative symbol of hate and of murder. And I know that for some people it can be really, really triggering. And so I debated a lot if I should put it on or how I should put it on. And in the end, I decided to just paint it on with gold leaf. And then in the rope are the names of lynching victims from the state of Missouri. Which the sad part is I included a lot of names, but I didn't include every name that there is because there were quite a few victims. And then down in the bottom corner, you can't totally see it when it's in the picture form, but there are a series of rifle shells that I used that I put names on. And originally I had a couple different ideas of names that I would put on there. And this is one of the paintings that, because of the pandemic and because of the protests, and because I had waited till June to finish it, I ended up putting on the bullets the names of people that have been kind of in the national conversation this summer. So George Floyd's name is on there. Breonna Taylor's name is on there. There's several other names on there. And it was probably one of the paintings that was the hardest to keep interacting with because I kept coming back to it and having to add more names. But I think that was also part of what makes it kind of powerful for me. And then the people in it are people that are or have been really influential in my journey and my understanding of race. And I wanted to kind of show that it takes a lot of teachers to learn something. Like, it's not just one person you listen to. You have to listen to a lot of different voices because people are not a monolith. Like, Black people are not a monolith. Not every Black person believes the same thing about race and about what to do with the problems we see in society. And so it takes listening to a lot of different voices to try to understand a problem and to figure out what your role is in trying to, achieve a solution. So yeah, that's kind of that painting. The next painting that's in the show is one of my favorite paintings. It's been hanging up in my room before it came to the gallery. And that's Did to Them, You've Done It to Me, which I just absolutely love all of the color on that painting. I did something totally different with it where I splatter painted it outside. So I had to pick some grass off of it when I did it because it got a little stuck. But so it was a very all natural painting. But I wanted it to have just a lot of color and a lot of vibrancy, and to also show that love is what makes people human. The showing of love, the receiving of love. That's one of the most human things that we can do, is when we love each other and we want to be in community with each other. And so if you get a chance to see the painting, I'm sure it'll get pulled up here in a second. There's a series of people that are in various like rainbow colors that are kind of marching around towards kind of the central figure. And he was kind of inspired by a news story I'd read last year about a husband and wife couple that would go to pride festivals and would wear these shirts that say free dad hugs or free mom hugs. And they would just give hugs to people. And I just thought that was so cool that they were trying to fill a role that's often missing for people who come out, and trying to be there for people in a way to prevent them from not feeling loved or not feeling accepted and feeling despair, like there's not any hope for things. And so as the people kind of march across the painting, the idea is that as they receive love, they're made fully human again, versus the people that are kind of over in the corner that are, holding up signs that are very kind of hateful. And that was another one, again, where I debated a lot what went on the signs. I did a lot of research into various protests that have happened or counter protests for things, and found some really horrible signs that people had posted. And so I debated a lot what to write on there and how to say things, because I wanted to be sensitive to people that have had these kinds of experiences, and not wanting to further victimize them, but also still wanting to show people like how hurtful words can be and how hurtful it is when we don't try to take the time to understand and to listen. So yeah, this one was one of my favorite ones to make, not least because, like, when do you get to put rhinestones on canvas in real art? And there's a lot of glitter on this painting, which was also super fun to use. It was just full of life and color, and that was what I wanted to kind of express with it. The next painting is I Thirst, and it's another one that was kind of inspired by a news story that I'd heard of this guy. I know his first name's Scott. I can't remember now his last name, but he's a doctor down, I think, in like Arizona area. And he had been going with a group of people that leaves water and food and medicine and stuff for migrants crossing the desert coming towards the United States. And he was arrested for doing this and was eventually acquitted. But it became this huge thing about, should somebody be arrested for trying to provide water for somebody that's dying of thirst in the desert, regardless of why they're there or what they're doing. And so that kind of formed the basis for that particular piece. And so you can kind of see, it'll probably come back up here in a second. There's a hand holding out a water bottle kind of through a fence. And then there's a family that's like fleeing towards the fence. And that was one of the things that I think I hadn't really ever thought that much about immigration into our country until I met a couple friends now who are in various states of immigration, either people that have married someone and so are now going through the process of immigration. I have a really good friend who moved here from China and for work and for school, and is in the process of trying to get her green card, which is a really, really long and expensive and laborious process. And so that changes the dynamic a little bit when you finally meet somebody that wasn't just born here and hasn't just lived here their whole life, and to kind of hear their story. And, you know, even if you came here and it wasn't like you were fleeing your country or anything like that, you know, just the process of trying to become a citizen is really difficult. And so, and then when, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago now, when they were posting all sorts of things on the news about children being separated from their parents along the border, that changed a lot of things for me, in terms of trying to reconcile, you know, how do we uphold the laws of our country while also not traumatizing, you know, a whole bunch of children and their parents, that we shouldn't have to traumatize people in an effort to keep the law. And so, so yeah, this painting was another one that I splatter painted, just because it was super fun to get that much color in the background. But then I wanted the central figures to kind of be kind of the kids. So we kind of reckon with, you know, we say all these things about wanting to be, you know, pro-children or pro-life, or that we're, you know, a nation that prides itself on being the land of the free and the home of the brave, or whatever those kinds of things are. But if at the same time we're not taking stock of how sometimes our actions don't actually prove that's true, and if we're not at least willing to have conversations about, you know, what do we do to keep families safe, even if they are, you know, maybe not following the law the way that we would like to see it follow the law, that all of those conversations need to be happening. We need to think through more of our policies and get beyond just, well, this is our political party's understanding, or this is our personal understanding, or whatever it might be. So that's kind of all of the pieces in the show, to a certain extent, is trying to get us to see beyond, this is my personal perception of what the problem is and how I think it ought to be fixed or whatever, to, you know, actually be able to listen to somebody else, to consider their opinion, to consider their experience, and that it's very, very different from our own. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through the rest of the stuff, because there's a lot of pieces in the show. And if you haven't already, there's an audio walkthrough that's on the Kranzberg's website that goes through all the pieces with a little bit more detail. So you can always watch that as well. So I created the big paintings, and then I created a series of 6 portraits that, because of the pandemic, actually became a lot cooler than they would have been originally. I had originally asked 6 different friends, well, technically one of the people is my dad, so friends and family, if they would allow me to do a portrait of them. And then I was having a conversation with one of the guys, Shade, who is one of the portraits, and he's also an artist. And he had contacted me early in the pandemic, when we were first sheltering at home, to see if I wanted to collaborate on something. I was like, dude, I would love to do that. That would be so fun. Do you have an idea? And he's like, no, I was hoping you would have an idea. And so I was like, no, I don't have an idea either. Let me think about it for a little bit. And so what we ended up, I was telling my sister about the conversation that I had had, and it suddenly dawned on me. It was like, oh, why don't I have him collaborate on his portrait with me? Because he's a very great artist. He'd be more than able to accomplish what I'm hoping to accomplish with it. And then I thought, well, geez, if I have him do his, I should have everybody else do theirs as well. I'm like, a couple of the people are pretty artistically talented. Some of them are, actually, I think everybody was really artistically talented. That helped a lot with the show. But I know some people, they don't necessarily see themselves as artists, so it might be a little bit more of a challenge to ask them. But everybody was really game, and I provided them with half of their picture. And some people wanted a really detailed outline. Some people didn't want as detailed of an outline. And I collaborated with each of the people that I did a portrait with. And so Shades was the only one that we had to do a lot more virtual because he moved in the middle of the summer and just did not have the ability to do as much of it as he wanted. And so we did a lot more verbal kind of collaboration and asking him about, how he wanted to be represented, all the different kind of pieces. And one of the things I was really proud of is he's a drag queen, and he creates almost all of his own costumes and does a lot of DIY for the things that he does for competitions or for shows. And so I tried to either reuse stuff I had laying around or hand make whatever I used on that side of the paper. And I'm just really pleased with how it all kind of turned out. And then like one of the other ones that I collaborated with a little bit more was Diamond. She lives here in St. Louis, and I'm really good friends with her mom and getting to be really good friends with her. And so I went over to her house one of the days to help her kind of think through how to collage the face, because it's a little bit difficult when you start covering up some of the lines and trying to figure out how to glue all the pieces on and get it all to kind of go together. But she did just an absolutely phenomenal job with hers. And it was really cool getting to talk to her as she was working on it and hear kind of her thought process for hers. And a lot of it had to do with self-image and how do you see yourself, and her journey to love herself for who she is and wanting other people to be able to do that as well. And then it was cool too to have conversations about, what the phrase Black Lives Matter means for her, especially in the light of this summer, and to have some of that kind of discussion as well. And so this was one of my favorite portraits that we did. I just love how it turned out. I also love that I didn't tell anybody how to do their portrait. My only stipulation for people when they worked on their half was to do something that represented them. So whatever medium you chose, whatever colors or shapes or ideas you used, it just had to represent you in some way. But I was really hoping that someone would do a collage and that someone would, add 3D elements and like all these different things. And people like just totally did it on their own, and it was awesome. One of my other really favorite ones of the portraits is Nora's portrait. Nora is, I believe, 5 years old, and I met her at church a couple years ago, and she is very artistic and she's super funny. And it was fun when I went to go pick up her half of her portrait. I got to their house and she immediately started screaming, "It's not done!" Because she still had one piece that needed to be finished. And I related so well with that because so often I'm in the middle of processing and creating stuff and people are like, "We need it now." And I'm like, "It's not ready." And so I wanted to show with her specifically that just because someone is a child doesn't mean that they're any less of a human being than a grown-up. And one of the things I hate is when people say stuff about modern art like, "Oh, my 2-year-old could have done that." One, because it's meant to be derogatory towards modern artists that don't paint in super traditional kinds of ways, but it's also technically derogatory towards your 2-year-old by assuming that his artistic expression isn't valid because he's 2. That because he can't draw in the same way that somebody who's a grown-up would means that his art is not as good or not worthy of being in a gallery or museum setting. And I don't think that's the case. I think anybody that takes the time to make an artistic expression is sharing a piece of themselves with the world, and they're trying to tell you a story about something. Even if they're telling you a story about nothing, they're still telling you a story about something. And so I really wanted to have a platform to kind of show that kids are just as important as adults, and they have some really fantastic ideas and ways of seeing the world that we could probably use more of. And so So yeah, that was one of the reasons why I was really proud to get to include Nora as one of the portraits. And then one of the last portraits, it was the very last piece I did for the entire show, was the portrait of my dad. And so that was kind of fun because he's the only one that I've known for over 10 years. I'm 31, so I've known him for 31 years, although some of that I wasn't super cognizant of. And so it was interesting getting to create his portrait, and his is kind of the one that sets the tone for all of them, because the idea is that as well as you know somebody, there's always more to know about them. I've known my dad my entire life, and we have a pretty close relationship, and I still hear stories all the time that I've never heard before, or he'll tell me things that I've never heard him say before. And it's just exciting to be able to get to know somebody more that you think you already know. And so that was kind of the purpose of the portraits, is to show that by having diverse friendships with people of different ages, different backgrounds, different sexual orientations, different genders, different religions, any of the differences that you could possibly have, that not only do you grow from that, but also that in continued relationship, you can continue to grow from learning from other people, because you're not going to learn everything there is to know about somebody in a moment. And so it was really fun to get to kind of put his portrait together and kind of combine the parts of him that were from before he had kids and kind of who he is now, and a lot of the shared memories that we have. It was also fun too, because he doesn't necessarily consider himself an artist, but I think he's actually super artistic. It's just maybe not in a painting, drawing kind of a way, but he still did an absolutely phenomenal job on his half of the portrait. And I just love, like, he has this beautiful titanium white hair, and he always has pretty much since I've been alive. And he did a phenomenal job of getting the hair to look fabulous. So then the last kind of movement or moment of the show is a series of 5 collages that I did. I initially had a different idea for what those pieces were going to be, and then I just ran out of time because I was really sick at the beginning of May. I had blood poisoning and was laid up in bed with an infected leg for like 3 weeks, and just lost a lot of time from that. And so I had to kind of figure out what I was going to do for kind of the third movement of the show. And then I started to realize that as I had been working on the show, like by the time it was completed and hung, it was 11 months of work. That I had changed a lot as a person, and I'd gone through a lot of researching, a lot of uncovering of things, a lot of soul searching of my own beliefs and ideas on stuff, a lot of change as I realized that what I believe isn't good enough or complete enough for who I want to be as a person and as an artist, and having to kind of come to some new decisions about, what I believe and what I'm going to do because of what I believe. And then just wrestling through all of the emotions, because a lot of the big paintings deal with some really heavy, tough subjects. And a lot of them, every single painting, I would finish the painting, and like a week later, something would happen in the world that had to do with that painting. And so it would be kind of reopening that wound of all that stuff that I'd just been reading about and had been frustrated or angry or upset about. And so I had a lot of really good conversations with friends and family over the course of the summer that kind of helped kind of work through some of those emotions. But I wanted to kind of memorialize that journey and to show that this kind of work is not easy. If you're an artist doing work about, serious issues in the world and trying to create places of conversation for people. And it's not easy if you're just a non-artistic person that's having to have conversations or trying to learn how to look for resources and to read things and all those kinds of things. And so the 5 portraits kind of, or collages kind of show different aspects of the journey. So things like lament, things like anger, the moments of joy that came from finding stuff that was really awesome, or having moments where the painting just really worked and came together. There's one of the specific ones that I love is Peacemaker. It was something that as I went through this journey that I kind of learned, if we don't have as a base heart value peace in our hearts towards other people, and the desire and the willingness to want to learn and to want to listen, it's really, really difficult to even pretend to have a conversation with someone. And so to be really diligent in our own lives to look at what's my heart towards this person? Am I willing to set aside, feelings, and or just at least to work through the feelings of anger or bitterness or frustration or fear or whatever it might be that keeps me from being able to draw close to somebody else and listen to their story. And that work's not easy, but that's what it means to be a peacemaker. Being a peacemaker is not about just kind of trying to cover things up and make everybody okay with each other again and try to go back to the way things were before it was all crazy and chaotic, but instead to work through the craziness and the chaos and get to the heart of things. And so, yeah, I really love just all the pieces that kind of came together with this one, and getting to play with color and with texture and all the artistic kind of stuff too. So that's kind of a quick walkthrough of all of the pieces. I want to leave some time for questions. Unfortunately, there's a lot of pieces in this show, so it's hard to talk about all of them and be concise. So yeah.
Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Megan?
I was interested in that last piece that was just up, Peacemaker.
Yeah.
There looks like there's some large letters in the background that repeat.
Yeah.
What word does that spell, if it spells a word?
Yeah, it does. It spells the word refuse over and over again. And if you look like up in the top right corner, you can kind of see it in the photo. You can see it a lot easier in person. But each word that says refuse, there's a smaller word in one of the letters that is the thing you're refusing. So one says, I think, refuse violence. One says refuse fear. I don't remember what the other two say. But yeah, that's kind of what's going in. I found with the collages, some of them, as you added stuff, they started to get kind of crazy and a little less cohesive, but that when I painted over them with words, it all kind of came back together. And so I think most of the collages had some kind of a word painted over the top.
So we also have a question from Matthew, and he is asking, how do you go about choosing your canvas sizes for this project?
So I had an artistic mentor a couple years ago. I was really frustrated with where my art was going and feeling like I was really stuck. And I showed him my portfolio and he said, your problem is you're not working big enough. Because I had a series of murals that I had done for friends that I absolutely loved. And they're usually the part of my portfolio that everybody talks the most about. And he's like, your problem is you're just not working big enough. You're trying to think too small. And I kind of reflected on that. I'm like, yeah, I'm not a small picture thinker. I'm a big picture thinker. And so I knew with this show that I wanted to do bigger canvases. Some of it had to be according to what I could fit in the car. So I can't buy anything that I can't fit in my car to like take somewhere. And then I also, because I had a specific number of paintings that I knew from the beginning I wanted to do, I took the gallery layout for the Kranzberg and divided up the wall sizes and chose the canvases based on how much wall space there was and trying to allow for like painting space painting. And so that meant that the 4 big ones could be 4 foot by 3 foot, and then everything else had to be 2 foot by 3 foot, and then increasingly smaller as you went along to like fit on the pillars and stuff. So yeah, it's not super like artistic or inspired. It was literally just what fits in my car, what's still working big picture, and what fits on the wall. So
So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So the work in the show is equally absorbed with surface texture and color. And you mentioned that you were experimenting with different studio processes. And I was wondering if this was fairly spontaneous or if you were more deliberate with your choices.
It's kind of a combination of both. I was really deliberate in the background and how it was constructed, especially after I did the first one. The first one's probably the most spontaneous of all of them because I had not done most of this kind of stuff before and I was figuring it out as I went along. But every single layer started off with, every single layer started off at the very base layer. There's a prayer on the bottom, and it was my chance to say anything I wanted to say about this particular issue and get it all out of my system. Because I didn't want it to just be about my view specifically, or for people to have the takeaway of like, well, this is what she believes. I wanted it to be more of a conversation piece. So I got my own kind of like thoughts and feelings out of the way at the beginning. And then I would cover all of that over with a layer of color that I kind of picked a color scheme for each painting. Because I found it's really difficult to glue paper of any kind to the canvas because it doesn't stick to the canvas texture. But if you acrylic paint over the bottom, it gives it enough of a texture that it can adhere to. And then from there, it was just a process of building up and kind of playing off the color scheme that I'd originally used, and constantly building layers up until it was ready to put the actual oil painting part on and get the faces on.
And then Anna has a question, and it is, do you have any ideas for future pieces or artistic themes rolling around in your head currently?
Actually, I just had a thought today. I've been kind of lying a little dormant artistically the last couple of weeks, just kind of letting the show be the show and not trying to scheme up the next new thing, which is a little unusual for me because I always have ideas for stuff. But I was out driving earlier today, and the thought I had was I really want to kind of press into and investigate this idea of being a peacemaker in the world. And why is it that it's so hard for people to be kind and compassionate and to have empathy for each other and to want to listen? So it's kind of similar to this show, but I don't know all of what that shape might look like or what kind of a track it'll take. But I thought about it would be fun to start with looking at people who are famous peacemakers in the world, like all throughout history from all over the world, and look at what was it that made them so effective when they refused to have violence in their hearts or to display violent actions towards somebody. And what was it about that drew other people to them and or repelled people from them? And so I think that's probably where I'm going to start leaning into as an artist and trying to figure out what to do with that visually from kind of that information.
Sounds really interesting.
Let's hope so.
And then another question from Matthew is, what was something you learned from installing in this gallery that you did not know how to do before?
I have never actually installed work in a gallery before. That was the quintessential, like, they joke about, on your resume, don't ever tell people you don't know how to do something. I just never really brought up, I've hung work at stuff, but I've never been the person that's specifically in charge of making sure it's all laid out right. And so, I learned always bring a guy that knows how to use a screw gun, and always bring your own screws, because I totally forgot to grab those on the way out of the house. Fortunately, my mom was with us, and so she was able to run and get them. And my dad actually had a really fantastic way of figuring out how to measure where to hang or put the screw by putting the tape measure at the bottom of the canvas and pulling it up, and then pulling the wire up and then measuring what that point is and figuring out from there roughly where the screw needed to be in order to hang it where we wanted it. And I was like, that's really genius, because that was the part of the whole theory that was escaping me, is like, how do I know that when I've put the screw in the wall and then hang it, that it will be in the spot that I want it? So yeah, the moral of the story is bring somebody that knows how to do carpentry measuring kind of stuff with you, so that way you don't look like an idiot trying to hang a show.
Alrighty, and we have a question from Randy. When you are picking a topic to present, how do you know which part or side to represent in art and not the other? And his example is Love Your Neighbor, the representation of victims of police shootings and attacks versus police that have been killed in the line of duty.
So one of the things that was kind of difficult with every painting was, again, not having so much of my view of something come out. And at a certain point, it's impossible for that to not happen, because I'm the artist and there's no way I can totally set aside what I'm thinking and feeling or understanding. And one of the ways I tried to address that was when I chose the articles that are in the background or the tweets or things like that, I tried to choose things from every side. So there's things from Fox News, there's things from CNN, there's things from conservative friends on Facebook, there's things from really liberal friends on Facebook, and every view in between. And I tried to, as much as possible, when preparing for the show to read as much as possible from all the different sides and viewpoints, because that kind of unconsciously influences the decisions that I make. At the end of the day, it's really difficult to pick one side or the other, and I tried really hard not to. But at the same time, it's also really hard not to pick a side. Where I kind of landed was I liked the site, the look of it being a protest march, but that it's not a protest march of just random people out there. It's people that I've listened to, and they're people that have stood up and said, this is not right, and this is why I think this is not right, and this is what I think we should do about it. But not all of those people say the same thing or would come to the same conclusions about everything. And that was kind of more of the point that I wanted to kind of talk about, is at the end of the day, it matters more that we listen to somebody and that we hear their side of the story, whether they are a policeman or whether they're a protester, whether they're white, whether they're black. One of the difficult parts of seeing the show virtually is you don't catch as much of some of that nuance, because it's there on the canvas and you can see it if you're up close, but it's a little difficult to catch on the just the pictures of it. And so I wanted to try to keep people at the forefront, and I did have a tendency to center the victims' voices, and it's difficult to say, you know, this group over here is a victim, but this group here also over here can also be a victim. So it's a lot of balancing that kind of out. And so, yeah, I don't know. It can be taken so many different ways. And I wanted to just try to create something that would create conversation, but would also be a little bit provocative for people that, you know, maybe haven't had to think about these things before. The show was kind of, there were some certain people in mind when I came up with the idea for the show, people that tend to float in and out of my circle, that tend to be kind of not great listeners and very opinionated about how the world should be. And so I tried to create a show that would challenge them to maybe listen for like 10 seconds longer than they usually would, but also to create a show that wouldn't be victimizing to people that have been victims of something. So I don't know. I think there's no way to tell every single side of the story in a painting, which is why I used a lot of collage. And so all the stories in the background. And so that would be the plug to get to go see the show in person for 2 more weekends. I know a lot of people don't have that ability. I'm hoping over the next couple of weeks on social media to post a lot of close-up shots of each of the paintings as the show kind of winds down, so people can see more of the stuff that's in the background. And so, yeah, that would be kind of my caveat to that. So. Looks like Katie might have gotten kicked out. Trying to find the chat. I just saw another question, so there it is. The question was, what would you say was the most rewarding component to you from beginning to end? What was the most frustrating? And what would be the most disappointing follow-up from the show? And what would you tell other artists who have wanted to lean into a presentation like this but are hesitant? So that's a really long question, but I will try to answer all of it. I think the most rewarding component of the show from beginning to end was actually doing a show that all went together and got to be a comprehensive series of something, and proving to myself as an artist that I am really an artist, and that I could do a body of work this big, and that I could make it as an artist potentially, and that what I have to say is important and valid, and I don't have to hide myself behind fear or other things of what people might think. That I was able to use pictures instead of words, and that I am a little bit stronger visually sometimes than I am vocally. And so it was cool to be able to use pictures to give myself the courage to use words when words were necessary. I think the most frustrating part of the show was just the emotional journey part of it. I'm not a super emotional person by nature, and I don't like having to deal with emotions, because I think it just gets in the way of other things I have to do. And so it was frustrating to have to take the time out to have a cry about something, or to write angry letters in a journal to try to just get all the frustration out, or to even be really excited about something when everybody else is like trying to work from home and they don't have time for you to be excited about something. Like all of the emotions, no matter what the emotion was, positive or negative, were occasionally just frustrating because having to deal through it and walk through them and try to figure out how to navigate the emotional end of it. It'd be easier to just be able to paint something and put it on the wall, but that was not what I chose to do. I think the most disappointing follow-up from the show is that somebody would go to the show and look at every single piece and be like, wow, these are really nice. That was great. And then do nothing else with it. The whole point of the show and the hope of the show was that it would challenge people. I don't think you have to look at every single painting in the show and go, oh yeah, I need to do something about that. But my goal would be that you find something in the show that sparked some interest or ignited a passion for something, or at least made you curious about something, and that you would go home and Google that, or look up organizations that do work with that sort of thing, or just even go to the library and get a book about it. Right now, the world is so technologically connected. It is not hard to find resources for any of the things that I put in the show. I mean, I didn't have any trouble finding resources for any of the pieces that are in the show. So like, it can be done. It just, that would be the goal of the show, is that you look at it, and part of your consideration of the show is you consider, where can I make some changes in my own life, or make some space in my life to read something or listen to a podcast or watch a documentary or try to figure out how to explain it to your kids or whatever it might be. That you don't just look at it and go, well, that was nice. That was a great 30 minutes of my life. And then, leave and do nothing else with it. And then I think the final part of the question was, what would I tell other artists who have wanted to lean into a presentation like this but are hesitant? I think we're currently in a situation in the world where we do not have time to be afraid of stuff. I think fear is always the enemy. Fear likes to be a big bully and shove us into corners and tell us that we're not important enough to say something, that anything we have to say is going to be wrong anyway, and people will take it the wrong way. I think if you start off from a place of love and loving other people and wanting to understand and wanting other people to understand, and if you try to keep that heart of love no matter what happens instead of a heart of fear, it's going to be okay. And you have the ability to have these kinds of conversations and talk about these kinds of things. But more than that, you have the ability to listen and to practice the art of listening. And I think as an artist, the number one goal should always be observation and looking at the world around you and trying to understand why things are the way that they are, and then showing that world back to people through your own eyes, through your art form, to show them, what it looks like in another way. And that a lot of change and conversation can come from that kind of a thing. So that would be my encouragement to another artist that's wanting to lean into this kind of work and is a little bit afraid, is to just not be afraid, and to work through whatever it takes to get past that fear. For me, getting past the fear had to do with educating myself, and learning as much as I could. And I read an obscene amount of material to create this show, and continued to read, and listen to podcasts and watch documentaries. That was my way of coping with the fear, is if I could be educated about it and could teach myself how to listen to more voices and how to take what they're saying and apply it to what I'm doing, I had less fear about what I was saying as I went along. So I think for everybody, it's going to be a little bit different what makes you comfortable to step out of that zone. But that would be the goal, is to overcome fear and just do it. So.
Was pretty much perfect timing. Thank you so much, Megan.
Yeah.
And thank you to everyone who joined us tonight. And hope everyone has a lovely meeting, or evening, not meeting. We're done with those for today.
Yes.
And Megan, I think you are now the one who has the power to close us out, because when it crashed for me, the host responsibility jumped to you. So,
oh, yay.
Yeah.
Well, then I will say goodbye to everybody, and thank you so much for coming and listening to me ramble about all of my artwork. And if you haven't got a chance to see the show, it is still up online virtually at the Kranzberg, and you can also make a reservation there to go see it in person for 2 more weekends. So So yeah, I hope you all get a chance to go see it. And then if for people that actually follow me on social media, or there's links on my social media on the Kranzberg website, if you ever have a question or an idea or something that came up when you look at the show, feel free to message me, and I will do my best to try to answer those. So yeah. So thank you, everybody. I will see you later.